Go ahead, do the intro.
I can't even remember what to say. Go ahead.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Baldestern's Captain's Table. This week we have a really special guest, and I'll let him introduce himself, and we'll talk about what he's done and where he's at in life. So,
Well, wait a second. Before you... I'm Jim. This is Scott. Right?
if they don't know that by now...
No. Then they just started watching. You need to go back and watch the other videos.
Yes.
But welcome. No, we do have... We live in Oriental, obviously. And the cool thing about Oriental is you never know who's going to show up at town dot. And just the fact there's such cool people that do. And we do have one that is with us right now, which is very cool. Very humble, like all the cruisers that come through here too.
So my name's Steve Donat, and I run a YouTube channel called Acorn to Arabella, Journey of a Wooden Boat. In 2016, I cut down some trees, milled some lumber on my family's farm in western Massachusetts, and started to build an Acorn Ingrid, which is a 38-foot double-ended ketch. It took me 7 years with a bunch of help. We launched in 2023 and in Massachusetts. Went down to Mystic, Connecticut for the boat show, went up to Camden, Maine, went south and overwintered in Cape Cod, which I don't recommend. It is pretty chilly and wet. Back up to Maine, and now instead of overwintering in the north again, we are hightailing it south. And I asked the viewers where we should stop on the way south and recommendations and things to be aware of, and there were many people who recommended that we stop in Oriental, that it was a super cool town and that we wouldn't regret it. So when we planned our course down, Oriental was on the hit list of places if it worked out to stop, and I'm really glad we did. It's been an amazing visit so far.
No, we got to back up here. I don't know if you guys heard that, but in 15 or 20 seconds, you said that you built the boat from scratch.
That is correct.
And
yes.
It's a wooden boat.
Yes.
You cut the trees down.
Yes.
And so it went from trees standing up to a boat.
Yeah.
And that in itself is just
amazing,
crazy,
it's
crazy. I mean, one, you cut the trees down, but now you got a tree that has to be turned into boards.
Yep.
How does that work?
Yeah. So initially, I cut the trees, and we used a little farm tractor. My grandpa helped me, and we piled all the logs up, and I borrowed a manual sawmill from a friend. So the motor ran the blade, but everything else was human-powered. So you had to roll the logs on by hand, you had to flip the logs by hand, you had to push the carriage by hand. And I took 2 weeks vacation from work and just milled every
dedication.
day. And I got to the point where my palms were so bruised from pushing the PV hooks and from pushing the mill and from pushing the lumber that I wouldn't be able to put my palms like on a table. I had to take a couple weeks off and let them heal. Wow. And then we used that round of lumber, pretty quickly realized that we needed substantially more. And at that time, we had started to garner some attention. And one day, this guy pulled in the driveway and was like, "What are you doing here?" He's like, "I see all the lumber, I see this crazy building." And so I showed him the start of the boat that we had and told him what we were doing. And he asked how we were getting the logs out of the woods. And I said that we were using the farm tractor, and he lost it. He's like, "Do you know how many people die logging with farm tractors?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I know, but I mean, it's what we have."
Yeah.
And he was just like, I can't stand this. He's like, "I'm a retired logger. I live the next town over, and I have a log skidder that's sitting in my driveway." And he's like, "If you guys are going to do more harvesting, like, please call me, and we'll figure something out." So some time went by, and we're like, "We definitely need to do another and a bigger harvest." So I called Peter, and I called my buddy Wes, and Wes trucked Peter's skidder down, and Peter worked with me for a couple days and showed me how to run the machine, and then he left the skidder with me for a month. And we went and harvested bigger trees and got deeper in the property than we could with the farm tractor. And then at that point, we had a log pile that was large by huge. And I realized that doing it with the hand mill was just a no-go.
Yeah.
So I reached out to a couple local guys, the J Team, who have some portable sawmills. And normally how they operate is you as a homeowner, you have a few trees, whatever, they come, you tell them what you want, And then when they leave, there's a pile of slash and there's a pile of stack and stickered lumber, and they take care of everything, and they charge you by the board foot. And I called them and I was like, I do not want to charge you by the board foot. I want to do this by the hour. I'm going to have a skid steer with a grapple bucket to feed you logs, and nothing needs to be stacked and stickered. We're not making boards. All the lumber for the boat we flitch cut. So you just basically put the log on and just run the blade down. Okay. And that way you keep all of the curves and you keep the maximum width of the boards. Right. And so when we laid out patterns and things, we could go right up to the sapwood and really use it. So in terms of sawmilling, that's really fast. You know, there's a lot less moving parts. So I told them I wanted them to come and just run their machines as fast as they could run them. I'm like, you're just going to sit there and play with your joysticks, and we're going to do everything else. So we agreed on an hourly rate. I borrowed my buddy's skid steer with the grapple bucket, rallied a crew, and we milled over 10,000 board feet in one day.
Wow.
They showed up with a wood miser, LT70 wide, so it's a 90 horsepower sawmill that can do logs that are 20 feet long and up to like 3 feet in diameter. Wow. And everything's automated, so there's these arms that lift the log onto it. So I would grab the skid steer, put the log on, he would put it on, start milling it, put the arms back down. I would grab the next log, put it on there, put the bucket up, help him slide all the boards into the bucket, run them over to the guys stacking. He would roll the next log on, and just production style. So we blew through what would have taken me probably 6 months to mill with the other machine. You know, we did it in
no
a day.
hands left.
Yeah, and everything was good. So yeah, that's how we piled up all the lumber.
Well, now before you go, I got to ask another question because this is going to make more sense. How did you get to the point where you decided that you wanted to build a boat?
That's what I was going to ask.
There we go. I mean, we already jumped into the story about getting there, but how does one go from
I've never sailed before to I'm going to build a boat?
I want to build a boat.
Yeah, that's that. I mean, not only is that not something that the majority do, right? I mean, sailing is such a small niche in the world compared to people.
Yeah.
And not only to go, oh, I want to learn how to sail. Well, I want to learn how to build a boat and sail a boat. I mean, that's just a huge. Did you get hit in the head? Or
A couple times.
how'd you come to that evolution?
Yeah. I describe it as like a tickle in the back of my brain, where like even as a little kid, I was like, someday it would be cool too.
Yeah, I gotcha.
You know, and growing up on the farms in Western Mass, I spent a lot of time in old barns. And I had, even as a little kid, the appreciation that somebody went out in the woods with an axe and a horse team and dragged these logs out and then hand-hewed them and then built this barn that has now stood for 100 or more years and has hosted parties and has had life and death in it, and is, you know, if you go into an old barn, like there's this feeling inside it, there's life in there, and it has happened, and you can sense that. And so I always had this appreciation for creating something like that that would outlast you. And we would vacation in Maine when I was a kid and camp on Hermit Island, and I would see the wooden boats go by. And I understood how you took wood and made it into a barn. I did not understand how you took wood and made it into a curvy boat that was like watertight. You know, like those pretty different disciplines. So I just found them always as this like kind of like magical thing. Like how do you take that and make that? And then the notion that you could then get on that boat and travel and explore and go do things. And then in 2011, I was on Cape Cod for vacation. We had a crummy rainy day, and I went to a used bookstore, and I found a book called 50 Wooden Boat Plans. And there's just 50 different boat plans, and they're all different types of construction and all different sizes, and I found it fascinating. So for the next couple years, I just picked up books here and there and read about boat building and boat design, and it was just, you know, something that I enjoyed doing. And then I turned 30, and I sat down and did some real life reflection. I was like, all right, I've gone to college, I've earned a master's degree, I've worked in a couple different fields that I could have careers in. I've done all these things that I'm supposed to do, and I have 2 weeks vacation a year. I have $1,000 a month that goes to student loans right off the top of my income. I'm not able to go do the things that I want to go do and go really live the life that I wanted to live. So at that point, I decided that I really wanted to try to make the boat thing happen. And I knew enough to know that if I don't like working with fiberglass, so doing a glass boat is just not something that appealed to me. I've always loved working with wood. And I knew if I got a used wooden boat that I could afford, I would end up rebuilding it.
Right.
So I figured if I'm gonna like strip off all the planking and go back to scratch, I might as well just start from scratch. And having the property and the trees gave me a huge leg up, because if you're gonna build a wooden boat, the lumber is the biggest expense. And having all of that, instead of buying oak at $7 or $12 a board foot, I mean, I think if you included my time, the fuel, the machines, and everything, I paid probably 5 to 10 cents a board foot.
Wow.
Wow.
Wow, that's substantial.
I still
Yeah.
don't want to build a boat.
So like that's what made
Maybe
it
a canoe.
possible.
Wow.
Yeah, having the access to that. And then when I was before I was born, my grandfather cut down the trees on the property and had them milled and built his house. And then when I was a kid, he did it again with the barn.
Yeah.
So I grew up with that mentality of, we can't afford to have a barn built, but we have trees. And this year we can afford to log and mill. And next year we can afford to do the site clearing while the lumber dries. And the year after that, we can afford to put in the foundation and buy the nails. And then that'll let us put up the frame. And by the time the frame's done, we'll have saved up enough money that we can put on the roof.
Yeah.
And 5 years later, we'll have a barn that costs us very little money.
Right.
So I kind of, just saw that, and that was the way that I grew up. So the thought of taking multiple years to build the boat was like, oh, it's just kind of how it's done.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
if you can't afford to just go do it. And I knew that to build the boat was going to be a significant amount of money, and it was also going to be a lot of time. And those two are kind of intrinsically tied. Like, if you have the money, you can spend it to gain the time. And if you have the time, you can use it to gain the money. But if you have neither money nor time, it's really tough. So through my research, I ended up coming across sailing YouTube channels like Vagabond and Delos. And I started essentially doing market research on them and trying to figure out how they were able to afford to do what they were doing. And I started to piece everything together between Patreon and merchandise sales and donations and paid integrations. And so you look at it and you're like, none of these one thing is huge.
Right.
But if you get a couple grand here and a couple grand here and a couple grand here, like all of a sudden a decent amount of money is coming in.
Yeah.
And I figured if people were willing to donate and contribute to kind of vicariously live through people sailing, that maybe they would be willing to do that to watch some crazy Yankee cut some trees and build a boat.
Well, cool. Maynard's take it to a new level.
You cut all the trees down, and you had. I obviously haven't done that. I mean, when I go buy wood from a
Lowe's.
or somewhere like that. So when you cut the trees, you you cut the trees down and you slice the wood up, and then you got to let it sit.
Yes.
Right.
1 year per inch of thickness is like your starting rule of thumb.
Wow. So how thick were your boards? Or I guess it depended. Some of them you needed big ones.
Yeah, some of them are bigger and thicker. Most of the wood we cut was 3 inches.
So that sat for 3 years.
Yep.
Wow. And what did you do during those 3 years? Cut more wood, or?
Yeah, I did some more wood cutting. We built a 24 by 50 foot like ramshackly boathouse to build the boat in. I had to build the lofting floor and loft the boat full size. Needed to collect the lead and pour the ballast keel.
No, wait a second. Back up. Lofting the floor.
Yep, lofting the boat.
Which is?
So, if you look at building plans, they're 2D, right? So it can be represented on a flat piece of paper. The problem with a boat is that it has to be 3D, and you can't represent it in just one image on a flat plane. Right. So when they draw the boats, there's 3 different images. So there's the boat as if you're looking at it from the side in the profile view, and then they basically slice it like this, and you look at it in that view, and then they slice it like this, and you look at it in that view. So modern plans are all punched into a computer, and the computer finds all the errors and makes everything smooth and fair. But the plans that I was working off of were drawn in the 50s, so they were all done by hand, and they had never been corrected. So you get it
line up.
Yeah, exactly. So you get a table of offsets, and basically what that is imagine a paint by numbers, but you start by laying out the grid and laying out the numbers. So the lofting floor needs to be as big as the boat is. So our lofting floor was 40 feet long and 11 feet deep. And then you draw the boat in profile view, so you have like your ballast keel and your keel timbers and your stem and stern. And then you draw your half breadths and you draw your diagonals, and all of these are superimposed over each other, all three drawings, because otherwise you need three different lofting floors. And they're all laid out on a grid. So the first thing you do is just make this huge massive grid on the floor, which has to be crazy accurate. Yeah. So the whole grid is laid out to a 1/16 of an inch. Yeah, so everything needs to be square. You're checking it all. Once the grid is all laid out, then you draw your 3 dimensions, and then you have to go start comparing them all. So Acorn gives you all these points, you plot all the points, and then what you'll find is when you spring a batten across the points, that say there's 10 points, you can hit 6 of them and have a fair curve. Now which 6 do you hit? So you have to float them. So you draw, all of them in one shape, and you're like, oh, that all looks really nice. But then when you look at that down a different angle, it creates a bump or a hollow in a different way. And then you fix that, and then that's basically like a giant web. So you tug on one piece, it distorts another. So you have to go back and forth between the 3 drawings and compare everything to make sure that everything is smooth and fair and equal in all 3 of those dimensions. Wow. And doing it the first time is like the hardest thing I've ever had to figure out. I mean, I had more just like head scratching, like what do we do, trying to figure out the lofting.
Well, plus the other part. I mean, I don't know that much about wood, but you've got also the different where the wood bends and where it doesn't want to bend, and sometimes it doesn't want to bend where you want it to bend. Yeah. So it distorts the shape there too, right?
Yeah, and you're laying them down with wooden battens, so you have a bunch of different weight battens for different lines. So like when you're running a fore and aft line, you use a really heavy batten so that it gives you that nice fair curve. But when you have to do like the turn of the tuck where your keel comes into your planking, you have to do that with a really thin batten, because otherwise the big one won't make that curve. Yeah. And then you're joining, a thicker batten here with a thinner batten to make this curve. And every time you bend those, depending on how and where you apply the pressure, they'll bend ever so slightly different. So you go through the lofting and you get all of that drawn and figured out and happy. And then from there you pick up your patterns for your molds. So what we did is you took roofing nails and you put them on the line so that the nail is flat and the head's sticking up. Okay. And then you hit the head with a hammer so that it sticks into the lofting floor. Okay. You do that all down your line, and then you take your pine board that's going to become your mold, and you lay it down on top of it and do a little dance on it. And then the nails make the imprints in the board. Yeah. And then you can mark that with a batten, cut that out with the bandsaw, assemble those, and then you get the molds that you then steam bend your frames into.
Wow.
So there was a lot to do, like while that lumber was drying, and then once things were lofted, you could pick up the patterns and make the mold for the ballast keel. And I needed 4.5 tons of lead to pour the ballast keel. So then there's the where do you find 4.5 tons of lead?
Yeah. And then how do you work with lead, because that's dangerous in itself, right?
It is. It's blown out of proportion. We did a lot. Of.
It's not as bad as they say it is, right?
I have most of my fingers.
Lead in paint, where little kids are eating paint chips and people are sanding the paint and making dust and inhaling it, is dangerous.
Okay.
Putting lead in water pipes and having the wrong acidity so that the lead gets into the water. Yeah. That's bad. But lead out in the environment, I mean, it's on the wheel weights in your cars. Anybody who goes fishing or hunting deals with it. There's lead roofing flashing on your chimney. There's lead solder in copper pipes in older houses. I mean, it's everywhere.
So you don't eat it.
Yeah, you don't eat it. Wash your hands. The real bad one is the dust. So anytime that you're cutting it or it's oxidized and you're working with it, you want to be wearing a respirator. People were very concerned that we vaporized and put lead vapors in the air. But to get lead to actually emit vapors into the air, you need to get it to 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit.
Wow.
Which we melted the lead over a wood fire in a steel drum, and the steel drum would become a liquid drum at 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit, so we're very confident that we didn't reach that mark.
He had security measures in place.
But,
It'll pour out before you get there.
Yeah, exactly. But with lead paint and lead in water pipes in certain places and stuff, it's just a really big buzzword right now. So people got really worried about that, but it's not as dangerous.
So how much? I guess so. You poured the lead into your keel.
Where did you get it?
So I got the lead from everywhere. At the time, I was working at a climbing gym, and I was not bashful about what I was doing, and I would just start talking with people and be like, "By the way, do you know where I can get any lead?" And I mean, you wouldn't believe though. Some guy would be like, "Yeah, man, I do a bunch of automotive stuff, and I got a bag of old battery terminals at my house that I was gonna cash in, but really I'm gonna get $3 for them. It's not really worth my time." So some guy would show up and give you a pound of battery terminals, and you're like, "Great, there's another drop in the bucket."
We bought a boat that had a whole bunch of lead shot in it, and we took a bunch of it out. I had lead sitting around here for years. I didn't know what to do. Still don't even know what happened to it.
Yeah, I did some Craigslist posts and stuff, and I found a guy whose dad ran a tire plant, and they had lead molds for putting the names on the sides of the tires. And it was this really hard lead, which is what you want for a ballast keel. And they used that so that they could just melt it down again and form a new mold whenever they changed the labels on the tires. And he had a few thousand pounds of it stacked up behind the garage.
And how many pounds of lead do you have in your keel?
9,500.
Oh my gosh.
Yep. The big one was sailboats. So I started looking, we learned pretty quickly to start looking for free boats with a lead keel. Yeah. We would look them up and go into the specs and be like, "Oh, it's got 1,000 pounds of lead, that one ain't worth it." You go find another one, you're like, "That one's got 4,000 pounds of lead on it, that one's worth it." And we would find ones that were in a place that could be cut up.
Right.
So you would get the boat for free. You'd have the dumpster delivered for the $500. Show up with the Sawzall and a bunch of other tools, and just decommission the boat in a day. Put the thing in the dumpster, and load up everything that I wanted to keep on the trailer and take it home.
Great way to acquire extra
winches
parts.
and all kinds of stuff. Yeah,
That's where my
absolutely. Yeah, all sorts of stuff. And then
recycling at its finest.
and then we'd cash in all the metals and stuff that we didn't use. So if I pulled off brass or bronze or copper hardware that wasn't in great shape, just got thrown in the bucket and got taken to the scrapyard, and there was another $20 towards things. And used a chainsaw to cut up the lead keels, which sounds bonkers, but it works really well.
Yeah,
we had soft enough.
We had a boat that drew 7 feet, and it needed. So they took a chainsaw and cut off the bottom, and then sent it up to Canada, I guess it was, to redo it. But they had 20 pounds of lead shavings on the ground from a chainsaw. Go figure.
And then I used a wooden mold buried in the ground to pour the keel.
Back up.
A
wooden mold buried in the ground. Okay. So
wood. Did
you get that?
Yeah.
Wood needs heat and oxygen to burn, right?
Yep.
Okay.
As soon as it's covered in liquid lead, there is no more oxygen, the wood won't burn.
That's right.
So it chars as the lead rises, but the lead immediately puts it out. And then by burying the mold in the ground, the mold doesn't have to be as strong because you have all of this earth around it supporting it.
Okay.
And if the mold does spring a leak somewhere, it ends up self-sealing because a little bit of lead trickles out, hits the cold ground, immediately hardens, plugs that up, and then when you dig the keel out, you just have a couple little tendricles of lead that you pick out too.
So how does one pick up 9,500 pounds of lead in one piece to put it on your boat?
It took 2 days, 2.5 days. bottle jacks, chains, and cribbing.
Oh my gosh.
So when I put the mold in the ground, I put some chains underneath it that were
I was
already
thinking
preset.
ahead.
And then we put some big beams on the chains and bottle jacks under the chains, and then just jack up and put
Block.
cribbing underneath and jack up and block until we could fill in the hole underneath it.
Yeah.
And then you put down wooden rails and pipes on the rails,
Yeah.
and then set the ballast keel down on the wooden pipes and use some block and tackle and some come-alongs and just winch it out of the hole and into the boathouse.
That
Kind of like
reminds me-
how you put a boat in the yard.
We had a Cal 21, no, Cal 24. This is one of the early boats that we had that we retired that had issues. So anyway, we retired that boat and we had just a hull where the guys over here at the consignment shop, I was like, do you want it? They were like, oh, we'll use it for a sign. So we had to figure out, well, we drove up next to this thing and dug a hole in the ground and tied the back of it and then jerked the trailer out from underneath it. It fell right down in
There you
it.
go. Yeah.
2 years later, the bad thing is the guys called and
We
they
had
said,
to
well,
get
you
it
better go
back.
get it. But that was when I called somebody who salvaged it. They came in because it had lead.
Yep.
So it was worth it for them to come and pick it up. And he winched it back up on another trailer.
Yep.
So,
Yeah.
wow. So was the lead, so you got this big piece of lead that's molded, right?
Yep.
But you got to get that in your boat? Or is
Under.
it bolted to the bottom
It's bolted to the bottom.
and then covered up?
No, it's not covered up. It's just painted.
Painted. Okay.
Yep. So what I ended up doing was bringing the lead to the cribbing where the boat was going to be built.
Which is different from the tables.
Yeah, so there was like a 24 by 50 boathouse, and there was a lofting table down one side, and then we poured the ballast keel off to the side and brought it into next to the lofting floor. And then as the boat got built, the lofting floor ended up getting taken apart because you don't really need it anymore, and we needed the space. And then I worked the ballast keel, so use a power planer and go down the lead and just smooth everything out
Okay.
and fair everything in, get the top all flat.
mask,
and,
right?
Yeah, oh yeah. Ready for the keel
That's when it's
timber.
dusty.
And then I actually built it upside down. So I put the keel timber down, put the ballast keel upside down on top of it, and then I could fit the deadwood fore and aft of that and make all of that nice and smooth and drill all my holes, and then flip the assembly right side up, bolted it all together, and then built the boat up from there.
Okay, so you got to back up again. You turn it over.
Yeah.
Oh, come on, I know what it's like to turn over an FJ. How do you turn over a 40-foot boat that's got 9,500 pounds of lead?
So you're just turning over the ballast keel and the keel timber.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Because you haven't built the rest.
I hadn't built the rest yet.
Okay,
No.
that
So
makes sense.
a lot of people get intimidated by the ballast keel and collecting all the lead and pouring it. So a lot of people build the boat and then try to put the ballast keel underneath it, which is totally doable. But with how big our ballast keel was, I had gotten some sound advice from a few boat builders who were like, the first thing you need to do is pour that keel, put it where the boat is going to be, and then just build the boat on top of it,
Yeah.
which is what we did.
No, you like how he says a lot of people get intimidated by building the ballast keel. No. A lot of people get intimidated by the whole process.
Yes. Yes.
I'm over here worried Scott's getting ideas. Y'all not building a boat.
We've got an expert that can help us how to do it.
So
No more boats for this guy. Time to enjoy.
fiberglass, metalwork. I can TIG weld really, really good. I can do fiberglass really, really good. Woodwork is not my forte. But Jim is totally geeking out over here
This is
listening to you
Yeah,
talk
this is
about.
too
I mean,
cool.
he loves working with wood, so you're safe, honey.
May not be.
I'm not gonna build a wooden boat.
I don't think you're going to win on that late conversation.
But now, see, how big was your
See the
place?
Last of Us yet.
boathouse?
May the
Yeah.
odds be forever
24
in
by
your favor.
24 by 50 boathouse is all he needed.
That's underneath.
That would fit.
That's underneath my house. No.
It's got concrete pillars under there too. Now I got to show you. My father years back gave me a cartoon, and it's boat building, right? And it had 4 steps, and it said, plans, put it together, whatever, 1, 2, 3, and it had a little note on the bottom. Make sure that you can get it out of the house. And so now this guy's got this big boat built, and it's inside the house. He's got no way to get it out. So I guess you can just dismantle the building
the
around
whole
it.
building around it was just constructed and meant for the boat.
Yeah.
So once the boat was ready, all of that got taken down. Yeah, the only hitch in the giddy up was I needed to spin the boat for the trailer to get it.
So you built it. You should have build it the other way around.
Well, no. So the issue is where the
No, of course not. I did it right.
where the boathouse could sit. There was a garage in front of it, so the boat didn't need to spin a lot. Probably needed to spin like 20 or 30 degrees for the trailer to back underneath it. So it wasn't like I needed to move it super far.
Right. Tell Jim about your building inspector story you told me yesterday. That was such a great story.
So we had a building inspector show up like very initially and said that the boathouse was too close to the road and we needed to move it. But we had like just started building the boathouse. It wasn't a big deal. And in the long run, I think that building inspector did do us a favor. A few years went by and all of a sudden a new building inspector showed up. And he was like, this doesn't fly. Like, you got to take this down. And I was like, well, why? And he's like, this doesn't meet any codes. And I was like, well, what do I need to do to make it meet codes? And he was like, I don't really know. He's like, there's nothing. There's no codes for this. Like, it's not designed for this. And then I asked him if any neighbors had complained. He was like, no, unbelievably, nobody has complained.
How much did you pay him off?
And so Granby, where I built it, I grew up there. It's 5th generation, and a lot of the neighbors have been there since I was a little kid. So for them, they're like, "Oh, little Steve Dinette's doing this crazy thing in his yard." Like,
look what he's growing up and doing.
Yeah, none of them cared. And then the property is also zoned 61A for forestry and agriculture. So equipment, chainsaws, logging, like that's all in all fair game. So I think as far as any of the neighbors were concerned, like we live next to a farm that has 40 acres of timber. Like this is the stuff that happens when you live next to a farm with 40 acres of timber. So building inspector was like, well, I can't tell you what to do because it doesn't really exist. And he told me that I needed to go and read the code book. And I looked at him and I was like, you do not want me to read that code book. I was like, I read the books and have taught myself how to build this. And at that point, we had like a planked boat. I was like, I will read that book. I will take notes. I will go do research. I will find exemptions. And I will argue you on the definition of the words that are used in this book. Please just tell me what you want me to do. And he was like, all right, let me think about it. He's like, I need site plans. I need some sort of... he was concerned also that we were too close to any sort of wetland and wanted some like wetland survey. I was like, all right, no problem there. Called my buddy who owns a local landscape architecture firm. And I was like, Jeff, I need site plans. These are what the buildings look like. This is where it is. He's like, great. The next day I have full-size stamped drawings. And they're like, you need to go to the local conservation commission. We're like, done. Went there. And they're like, what are you here for? I'm like, oh yeah, you're the guy building the boat. Dave's grandkid. Oh yeah, oh no, you're fine. Get out of here. So I showed up at the building inspector like almost the next day with all this paperwork. And he's like, I didn't need half of this, but holy smokes, you know some people.
I better quit.
And then his big concern was fire. So he's like, I want the fire department to come by and like give their opinion on this. And how? Yes, perfect. So,
Do you know those guys too?
well, the property is owned by my grandparents. And so I told the building inspector, I think the property owner should be here for this conversation. He's like, yep, totally. So the fire department showed up, called my grandpa. My grandpa walks into the boathouse, and the two guys from the fire department go, Chief, it's so good to see you! and my grandpa goes, Bill, how's your wife? I heard she just retired. John, you just had a kid, blah, blah, blah. And that's when the building inspector learned that my grandfather was the retired fire chief in town. So now the guys are looking at my grandpa going, Chief, what are we doing here? And my grandpa's looking at the building inspector going, I don't know, what are we doing here? The building inspector's just like, oh, shit. So he gave me a temporary permit, and I never went and got for a renewal or anything, and they just kind of left us alone after that. And when I had asked him if anybody had complained, and he said no, I was like, so correct me if I'm wrong, but there are no rules about me having staging. And he's like, correct. And I was like, so basically my walls can stay, and it's the roof that's the issue. And I was like, I'll just take it down, and I will make the most ridiculous tarp palace that you have ever seen, and I will make sure that the neighbors complain.
And then that's on you.
Yep. Yeah, so at the end of it all, he gave me my permit, and he was like, you know, you've obviously been here a long time. He's like, Granby is one of those small towns. He's like, where the state building commissioner might not like what's happening, but you're like, the townspeople are cool with it. Yeah. So do you want to try to go to war with this little town out in Western Mass? This little town will happily take up arms and go to war for one of their own? Or do you just leave them be and let them do their thing? Yeah. So yeah, we got real lucky with that.
Well, that's a small town, knowing the right people, and being who you are.
Yeah, and if my family and I didn't have like a decent reputation in town, it would be completely different.
Yep.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, it allows you to do so much more when you take care of people, and
that's how Oriental is.
Yep.
Even when it comes to their license plates.
Yep. Or boat building. So mind you, we built, and this is nothing like what you built. Ours is more like putting together Tinker Toys. We bought a 36-foot catamaran. Yeah, it's known as a boat in a box. It came in a container. Actually, it came on a flatbed truck. But I had this wonderful idea of going to go get a boat. Figured, get a charter boat. And anyway, that's a whole nother story. But this boat shows up on a truck. Actually, before that, I went and had it surveyed in Colorado. Mind you, is where the boat was surveyed.
Lots of oceans there.
Yeah. Lots of trial places.
John Stammas?
Yeah, John Stammas. So he had built this boat and he had repoed it, taken it back, and was repainting it, and that's where I bought it. So we did a survey on a boat that was taken apart, and it had 2 hulls and all kinds of other pieces. And so the surveyor was like, "You want me to do what?" Anyway, a long story short, the boat shows up, and we put it together by the boat ramp.
Okay.
The condos weren't there yet, so it was one big open lot, and we started. And next thing you know, Oriental's like this. Oriental's, is wonderful. If you need help, which we've done with the FJs too, we've had trucks show up and you put on Town Dock, towndock.net, and we say, we need help, we need labor. Next thing you know, 20 guys show up. Yeah. But we had a revolving door of people coming to help us put this boat together. Yeah. And it was just neat, but nothing like.
They were curious too. They're like, "What you doing, Jim?
Yeah, what are you doing? What's going on?"
Yeah.
So my job was to keep everybody going and keep everybody fed. And I did that portion of it, and I actually didn't turn too many screws. But it's just amazing to even fathom what you're talking about, and the pieces, and because your 10-second thing is like months or years.
Yeah.
And wrapped into 10 seconds.
So how long did it take you to build again?
Just over 7 years.
From cutting the trees.
Yep. Cutting the trees to in the water.
So how did you get it from your granddad's barn to the water?
Yeah, so we took the boathouse down, and then we spun the boat to 20, 30 degrees or so.
We got a bunch of shovels and a bunch of guys, right?
And water hose made a creek all the way to
I called Brownell, and they came out with their truck and trailer and scooped her up, and she did 70 miles an hour down the Mass Pike to the ocean.
Wow.
That's when there's with those hydraulic trailers. And
yeah.
Now, being that it's wood, you have to be really careful where you put the hydraulic jacks, or
not on my boat.
You weren't worried about that?
No.
Now, what was it like when you first put her in the water? How bad did she leak?
Not much at all.
Okay.
No, we were really, really diligent with paying in the seam compound. Mm-hmm. So since I planked her in oak swells and shrinks a lot.
Right.
So through the rest of the process of the build, I had planks that some of them opened up like 1/4 of an inch.
Yeah. Right.
So we ended up, a bit before we painted and caulked, we actually steamed the entire boat. So through the process, we did a whole bunch of steam building, and I ended up making like a huge steam generator. It took like a 300-gallon old water tank and cut it in half, and the bottom half sat with its top open, and that became the firebox. And then the other one went into it with the top open as well, and we made a wood lid for it. And you fill like, I don't know, 50, 60 gallons of water in there, build a roaring fire on the bottom, and it would just pump steam for an entire day or more. So we had that built from steaming covering boards and other stuff. So I just hung a tarp around the sheer of the boat, and we fired up the steam box and just stuck the hose underneath the boat.
Yeah.
And by the time the steam goes into such a big place, it's not hot or anything.
Right.
But it basically put the boat into a perpetual fog bank for several days.
To let it
swell up a little bit. And all those gaps got a bit smaller to the point where we could just gently caulk them. And then seam compound goes in, and we were really meticulous about just shoving that putty in there really deep, really tight. So when we put her in the water between the fresh paint and the seam compound and the cotton, she really didn't leak bad at all. And then, I don't know, maybe a few weeks later, she pretty much stopped leaking.
Now, see, some people might be thinking that I'm picking on you by saying you put a new boat in the water that leaks, but wooden boats do that.
Oh yeah.
I mean, they wouldn't. And if you took her out and left her out for a while and put her back in, she'd leak again.
Yeah. I mean, we took her out in Rockland for a week last winter when we hauled, and she leaks for a little bit when we put her back in.
Yeah.
Well, I saw that one video on your YouTube channel where you were in the dinghy with your friend, and you were going around and you actually showed where the seam was, and it wasn't bad at all.
No.
So I mean, it did. You did really, really good.
Yeah,
on
she
your
tightened
seam
right up.
Do you have a hard time getting her hauled out anywhere? Because I know a lot of yards don't like picking up wooden boats.
I haven't had an issue. We also were getting her hauled up in Maine, which is tons of wooden boats. They're really used to it. And then anybody who's had any concerns, like she's an 1.25 inch plank of white oak over 2.5 inch bent frames on 1 foot centers.
Oh wow!
Like,
yeah. Even if you put the strap in the
wrong,
it's just going to span over the tree.
Yeah,
she's
it's not
fine.
like fiberglass. I mean, you could strap that thing just about anywhere. Whereas fiberglass, you pull the strap through.
Right.
Yeah.
And being that it's new enough, it's not like a 100-year-old wooden boat.
No, she's not fragile or frail at all.
Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah, she's built like a tank.
Yeah.
It's funny talking with boat builders because they'll ask about her scantlings, and I'll start rattling off the numbers, and we're like, those are the numbers I would expect on like a 60 or 70 foot boat. Yeah, she's beefy.
Wow. And she's an Ingrid, is that right?
Technically a stormy petrel, but a stormy petrel is simply a gaff-rigged Ingrid.
Okay.
So the hull is an Ingrid.
We've got a good friend that owns an Ingrid. Or owned an Ingrid. I'll tell you later.
You ain't got no friends.
Yeah, no. I made that one up. No, we'll give him a call. I think he would love to see it because he cruised on an Ingrid for a while.
Nice. Yeah, they're well proven boats.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, from the time you put it in the water to sitting here now, how long have y'all been on the boat?
So we've been living aboard for a bit over 1.5 years. It'll be 2 years in June. But we had about a 4-month hiatus this summer when we were in Western Mass taking care of my mom before she passed.
So you went from, I think I want to build a boat and live on a boat.
I can do that.
to now you're actually doing it. What have been some of your hardest struggles transitioning from living in a house to living on a boat?
I think the hardest part was initially juggling land life and boat life because my mom had cancer and we needed to be around for that. So up until she passed in September, basically every decision needed to be factored around that. So when our winter slip was done in Cape Cod at the 1st of May, we needed to get the boat somewhere ASAP, where if we got the phone call and I needed to peace out for 3 months, that we could get there, tie the boat up, and leave within a couple days.
Right.
So that made it like our next spot for that was a mooring in Rockland, Maine. So we needed to go from Cape Cod to Rockland, Maine as fast as we could, so that we were close to that mooring, so that if we got the call, we could drop and go. Sorry.
Turn your phone off before you do one of these things. Spam.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No worries. So that was really challenging, and we had the truck with us because we needed to be able to go back and forth. So every time we moved the boat, we also had to jockey the truck and finding a place where we could keep the boat and also have parking for the truck. That was tough. And then being on the boat in winter in New England is also tough.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, so much of the boat is being on deck and in the cockpit and enjoying nature, and when nature is blowing 40 and 30 degrees and raining, you know,
that's no fun.
No
There's not
fun
much
at
enjoying
all.
that.
No, and you know, just me, Robin, and Akiva crammed down below in the boat, just waiting for warmer weather. So we got some pretty good trial by fire.
Yeah. Absolutely.
But since then, things have been a lot easier. Once we ditched the truck and we're far enough south that we're not just in this race with the cold weather, and we've actually been able to like slow down and enjoy it. The cruising life has been awesome. But I also come from a background of I led adventure education and backcountry trips for a long time. So my biggest stint in the backcountry so far is 60 days without coming out, without taking a shower, without sleeping under a roof. And I've done 30 days on a couple occasions, and for a big chunk of my life, 2 weeks at a whack, I would be out in the field and then, you know, back into a house for 4 days for days off to repack gear to head back out again for 2 weeks. So coming from living out of a backpack or a canoe or a kayak and paddling or hiking every day to make your mileage and pitching a tent and breaking it down in the morning and cooking over a stove and not having any refrigeration. Yeah, the boat's pretty luxurious.
That's Taj Mahal right there.
Air conditioning for this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, what about during the
I didn't do
building
the outside
process?
education stuff, but
During the building process, I mean, I know there had to be times where you had to look at yourself and go, what have I done?
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
What have I started? But then at some point you got to look back and go, but I'm this far, I can't quit now.
Well, I mean, even when I got to like the lofting and it was really struggling and it was very, very beginning of the project, the other days it was really frustrating. But when I first started, people would ask me how long it would take, and my standard answer was 2 to 10 years.
There you go.
And they would be like, that's a big timeline. And I'm like, yep, you know, if we launch YouTube and some billionaire finds it and goes, this is really cool, here's a fat check, hire some people and go build your dream, we'll be done in 2 years. And if I gotta like scrimp and save and work a job the full time I do this, and then it's probably gonna take more like 10.
Okay.
You know, and people would ask how much it would cost, and I'd be like, I think I can get the whole thing done for like 50 or 70,000 if I find a used motor and if I sew my own sails. And I was like, or I could spend $1 million.
Yeah.
You know, and it just depends on how much money comes in and what resources I have at the time. And I went into it knowing that it was going to break me and that I was going to come out the other side a better person, and that it was just going to be a really big challenge. I knew that there was a ton I didn't know and that I was going to have to figure out. So I think I went into it with such just expectation that like this is going to be a shitload of work, and there's stuff that is going to be harder that I haven't even thought about. And but I always felt like if I didn't do it, I would always wonder if I had. And people would ask, you know, like, you haven't sailed, you know, spent a lot of time on the water in a boat like that, you know, like, what if you hate it? And my answer was always like, I don't think I will, but if I do, I really don't think that I will have regretted building this boat and the community and the experiences and the skills that went along with it. And then, if I go live on the water for a year and I decide I really don't like it, then I'll part with the boat and I'll have this valuable asset that I can sell. It'll set me up for whatever the next thing I want to do. And I don't think I'll ever have regretted, you know, going out in the woods and murdering some trees and building a boat out of it just for the sake of that experience.
Well, that's got to come around full circle in that, I think you'll say the same thing when it comes to boating. it's never about the destination.
Yeah, it's always the
It's
journey.
always about the journey.
Yeah.
And if you can get to, you may get to this and realize, wow, sailing is not for me. Well, the journey that you've gone through is invaluable. And just yeah.
And that's the difference between sailboaters and powerboaters, because
Don't be mean.
I'm not, but power boating is definitely about the the destination. It's about getting there as fast as possible to enjoy the maximum time.
Yeah.
And sailing it's about the whole thing. It's from the time you woke up to the time you went to bed and every moment in between. And something about sailors is that, you know, we love that struggle bus, right? Because that's the stories we talk about later.
It's gotta be some hard times.
Yeah.
Well, you're looking for the Type 2 fun, not just the Type 1 fun.
Oh, somebody that understands all that. I love that. We talk about.
That's a wrap for this two-part episode of Baldestern Presents The Captain's Table. We hope you've been as inspired by Steve and Robin's journey with Arabella as we have, but the story doesn't end here. Join us next week as we dive into the incredible journey that brought Arabella to our little corner of the world here in Oriental. Thanks for listening, and until next time, fair winds and following seas.